Most teams are using AI the way that organizations adopted calculators in the 1970s. Everyone received a calculator, and at that point, people stopped doing the long divisions by hand or in their heads. The work got a little faster, of course, less error prone, but other than that, not much changed. It was like a single tool that just replaced a single task. Same processes, same workflow, same org structure. But the calculator just kind of sat on the desk and made that individual math a little easier. And that was it. And in my experience with working with leaders and understanding how also they're leveraging AI and how they're organizing their teams around it, or how much their organizations are leveraging AI or introducing it, I'm noticing that someone uses it to draft an email. Someone else runs their meeting notes through it or records the meeting and then creates summaries. A third person uses it to generate some kind of report or a slide deck. Each person has their own thing going on, their own calculator on the desks, and uses it for some specific, beginning to end kind of tasks, just dropping it into Claude or ChatGPT or whatever tool available. And while people talk about AI and what's coming and are reusing AI and experimenting with new things, and there might be, pushing the boundaries a bit, and they're doing more than just slide decks, and they're doing more than just meeting notes. And while they might be learning and improving on things, it's still done in an isolated way, sort of like a solo mission, their own calculator on their own desk. And not enough conversations really happen on the team level. People aren't questioning whether the underlying processes even make sense at this time. And this show is all about supporting leaders in their roles and being effective and actually stepping fully into their leadership role and being at the forefront, being a leader in this change and in this transformation as AI continues to be rolled out and sort of infiltrates organizations and our own personal lives too. This is one where the conversation with the team, the conversation on the department level, the higher level strategic conversations for the organization, it's the job of the leaders to initiate those, to create the space, to encourage the dialogue. So if you're leading a team, it's your job to do that for and with your team. So if the technology has moved that you're using and the access to AI tools has sort of opened up and more has become available, but your workflows haven't, then you're exactly at the moment of time where this episode is the right thing to listen to. My name is Ramona, and this is the Manager Track podcast. So today we're going to talk about what it actually looks like to move your team from this early calculator stage, which is everyone using the tool by themselves individually, to that next stage in which we need to redesign our workflows. So I want to give you 5 concrete things that you can do as a leader, and I'll reference some research on where organizations are getting stuck and what the more advanced teams or organizations are doing differently. And I'm going to spend some time specifically on meetings because that is where I see the biggest gap right now and probably also the lowest hanging fruit. Okay, I want to set the stage really clearly here. I want to define what it means when I say stage 1 versus stage 2, because I think this framing is useful, at least for this context here. Okay, so stage 1, sort of the introduction of the calculator, I think I already explained that well enough. But let's talk about stage 2. So this is where AI is embedded in how the team operates, not just how individuals work. So the output of an AI-assisted step feeds into the next one. Systems talk to each other. Processes are streamlined at the team or maybe even the organizational level. It's not siloed because if you think critically, the team has actually sat down together and asked, given everything that's available to us now, how should this work? So the question in stage 2 is not how can I use AI? The question is, given that AI is available to us, how should this process, this workflow actually work? And again, most teams are in stage 1 and this is progress, which is great, but don't miss the boat. We need to be in stage 2 now. I want to be really clear. Stage 1 is a valid starting point. that needs to happen. But if you stay there and you stay there for too long, you're going to be doing things in a fragmented way, in an inconsistent way. And maybe you can work your way through for another year or so until someone forces this conversation onto you, because it's not transformation and it's not going to last. So if you don't want to be the last one on the train, but you want to be the first one, then these conversations with the team and the workflows need to happen now. So the leaders that are getting ahead right now are the ones who are having that conversation proactively about what is available now, but also strategically about what do we expect to be available to us in 3 months, 6 months. And, I would like to say further out, but it's hard to predict what technology will be available to us and in which direction it's developing further than like 6 months out. So maybe it's 3 to 6 months, and you sit down and you really do that exercise of now, 3 months, 6 months. Where are we headed? What kind of future are we building here? And your company might be a long existing organization, and it's not going to be an AI first organization. No, it's an enterprise. So there's a lot more to it. Or your company might actually be something physical. Maybe it's a bakery. It could be, a retail shop. It could be anything that is sort of brick and mortar. And you also know that you're not going to be AI first. There's physical product here that we're working with or dealing with, or humans who actually provide a service. And in these situations, nevertheless, the conversation of the back end, all the technological stuff, the digital things, need to be evaluated on the workflow level, not the individual's job and responsibilities or their tasks. And I'm going through exactly that same experience alongside everyone else with Arcova as well. While the service is directly human to human, whether it's running workshops, coaching programs, executive coaching, team building, all of these things are direct human to human services. The entire backend is all digital. And I can't just sit back and think like, well, I'm not part of this because my service is human. No, I got to keep up with the transformation on the back end. And I personally see, because I'm deep into a range of different things on the operational side, I can see how looking at an isolated task will quickly break the system and keep me stuck. So redefining not just roles and tasks, but entire workflows and dependencies is what's going to be key in this second stage. Okay, but before I say anything else, I want to be really careful about one thing. When I talk about humans being the obstacle here, so to speak, I'm using that word carefully. Humans are habitual creatures, and that's not a judgment. That's truly how we're wired. We default to what's familiar, and so that can hinder change. At the same time, humans are also the reason that AI adoption is hopefully not going to be reckless. We're hopefully not planning that doomsday scenario, although that possibility exists. But the way to prevent that is not by letting AI on the loose. It is by having human intervention. So we're the ones who catch the edge cases, who manage the relationships, who think through the second order effects. So this isn't about getting humans out of the way. It's about getting humans, specifically leaders, to make the deliberate choices about where automation makes sense and where it doesn't, and to be able to keep up with the timeline to know that the automation that worked great back in November is not what I should be thinking about today. We're automating different things and in different ways today than we would have in November. And so it is on the leader to take that responsibility for the entire team to think this through. Okay, let's talk about where the gap shows up the most. The area I see the biggest gap, and I think the biggest opportunity, or maybe it's the easiest opportunity, is in how teams run meetings. So think about how your team runs meetings right now. Maybe someone creates an agenda, maybe not. People come in without having done the prep that would actually make the discussion useful. They may not have read the emails or any documents that were shared ahead of time. Then there's a conversation. Someone may take notes, but they're also trying to participate. Maybe you do have AI note-taking integrated into meetings, and then action items get agreed on. Maybe they're written down. If they're written down, maybe they get emailed back out, and maybe people actually read that email, maybe not. Decisions were made during that meeting, potentially, and then Some people have them on their notes. The decisions were captured sort of unstructured, but we trust that everyone just wrote down whatever, they're responsible for and will act on that. And the follow-up decisions were made are scattered across the different. So that entire process can and actually should look completely different today. First of all, the agenda can be generated based on standing context of what your team is working on. Let's, use a team meeting here as an example. AI can pre-read materials, look up past meetings, create the agenda based on additional context. It can also pre-read materials for that specific meeting to then create a document for preparation that everyone should read before the meeting starts, so that during the meeting, decisions and actions can be made and are being captured in real time and logged centrally. Like maybe you use Notion or Asana or whatever else tool you use, and you have a tracker where decisions are being documented. And you prompt the AI to track that as a decision in said decision tracker automatically. Similarly, action items get logged as well. And then after the meeting, the summary goes out automatically. Action items are assigned, again, into whatever tool you use, and follow-up materials are drafted based on what was discussed. The meeting itself doesn't have to change that much, but what changes is everything around it. And again, if I decide I'm going to use some kind of like AI recording tool for my team meeting, but no one else uses it or it's not integrated anywhere, then I'm using it as a calculator. But if I start to think about workflows, I would look at the entire process from setting the meeting with the agenda, the preparation of it, the tracking of what is discussed, to connect it to the platforms and technology that we're already using. Like I track in Asana some kind of task and then I assign it to someone. As I'm talking, I can record that and then it can automatically update that with the right prompts or in the right follow-up after the meeting. And then the summary goes out at the end of it. It might even prompt me by the end of the week to check in on certain statuses of tasks that were assigned. That would be looking at the whole thing as a workflow. And this is a simple exercise with the meetings. That's why I'm saying it's kind of a low-hanging fruit, not a whole lot of risks. It's an easy one to demonstrate what we're talking about and to get started. Now, right now, in most teams, status updates, for example, are also still a manual process. Someone writes them up, formats them, sends them. I mean, maybe they use AI by saying like, hey, write this out nicely, create bullet points based on this and that. But everyone kind of does it differently. Everyone has different prompts for how to create them and then shares them in Slack or some platform. And so the same work gets communicated in, let's say, 4 different ways, depending on who's writing the update and what type of tools they're using for that. So if you step back and ask, what should this process truly look like in a world where AI is available to all of us and we should be using it not individually but collectively, then the answer is probably not, okay, just keep doing what we're doing, not relevant. No, there should be a system, a shared template, a shared workflow, so that status updates are generated the same way or pulling from the same data source, and then also communicated the same way, and people aren't reinventing this every single time. And when you have a new hire, the new hire has to go like, wait, what? How do I do this? And how do you do this? And they have to figure this out. No, it's a system that runs and is in place that they just plug in and they're off to a great start. It may sound like a simple thing or that I'm making this more complex than it should be. Why can't people just write their own status updates? That's not the point. What I'm calling out is it's a mindset shift. And if you want to change a mindset, we can't just think about it one time like that but every other time we keep our old mindset. If the mindset shift is to like, hey, we have to rethink everything we do, start to think a lot less in silos and a lot more in workflows and dependencies, that then needs to apply to everything we do collectively, like the team meeting, like the status updates, like the projects we run, not just ever so often. I want to add a little bit of context here from 2 pieces of research. McKinsey's Global Institute estimates that 60 to 7% of the work tasks happening in organizations today are automatable using technology that already exists. And that's not a projection about the future, that is literally now. And the reason it's not happening faster isn't because the technology is missing, it's because organizational behavior is slow to catch up. People keep doing the things that they've always been doing them, right? Sort of this is the familiarity approach here, not because it's actually optimal, but again, because it's familiar. So that's a really important point. The second piece comes from MIT Sloan and Deloitte, who ran a study on AI adoption as well. What they found is that organizations where AI was integrated at the workflow level, not just handed to individuals, reported productivity gains roughly 2.5 times higher than organizations where it was used in an isolated person-by-person way. So the difference wasn't the tools, it was whether someone had taken a time to think through the entire process. The companies pulling ahead, again, aren't using better tools. They're using the same tools, likely, plus minus, with better thinking around the process and the workflows. So let's get a bit more practical. What are 5 things that leaders can do? Practical moves, not theory. 1, run a workflow audit with your team. Block, maybe it's 2 hours, block half a day out of your calendar. Sit with your entire team and map out everything that your team does on a regular basis. Every recurring process, every standard output, every weekly task or monthly or quarterly task. And for each one, ask 2 questions. Are we still doing this the way we did it a year ago? And 2, what would this look like if we redesigned it with AI available from the start? So we've never ran this process before, and now we have all these tools available, and someone would say, hey, create this workflow, deliver this output. How would we go about it? And I really encourage you, not do this as a solo exercise, because again, it will kind of reinforce the solo mindset. Because the people on your team know the details of their work better than you do. They're also, by the way, a lot more likely to actually change their behavior if they were part of deciding what changes. So, right, with any new implementation, any change, there's sort of the actual change process, and then there's the human aspect to this. If you want to be effective, you always got to consider both. Involving people in deciding what's going to change and how you're going to go about it is creating that buy-in that's so important. So that is number 1. Number 2 is redesigning meetings as a system. Like I've talked earlier as an example, pick one recurring meeting and redesign it end to end. Not just the meeting itself, but the prep, the capture during the meeting, and the follow-up and all of that. Decide as a team what AI does in each phase and what the output looks like and where it lives. Then do that consistently for 4 weeks and see what happens to the quality of the meeting and the time it takes. By the way, all of this stuff is iterative. What you decide now is not going to be what's true in 3 months. Likely shouldn't be, but you have to get into this process of adapting and changing, but having it seen as an entire workflow that everyone's involved in and everyone understands. So then this one meeting becomes your proof of concept, right? And once people see how different it feels to walk into a meeting with actual sort of aligned, coordinated preparation, and then walk out with decisions locked and action items already assigned, they'll want to replicate this everywhere else too. So that's number 2. Number 3 is to set shared standards, not the individual experiments. That was stage 1. So one of the biggest mistakes I see right now is that every person on the team is doing their own thing with AI, and there's no shared standard. Not just the fact that they're doing it by themselves as a task, but it's about the standard here. One person uses one tool and someone else uses another tool. So output looks different. Quality is inconsistent. And likely, people aren't really sharing what's working and what isn't. Many of them are hoarding it or withholding information. And I see this, by the way, even in teams that officially have these AI brainstorming sessions where the intention is to share best practices or things that work. people are really mindful of what they want to share or don't, because ultimately it's kind of their task. Again, siloed thinking that we want to break out of. So your job as the manager is to set some guardrails. And I don't mean rigid rules. I'm calling these shared standards. What tools does the team use for what purposes? What does the status update look like? What gets logged where? How do we track decisions? How do we track the workflows and the AI that was used for what? What's the review process for AI generated outputs before stuff goes to clients or to leadership? What information you need to share? If I'm the manager and you submit a report to me and I don't know what you created with AI and what you didn't create with AI, what data is coming from where, it's going to make my job a lot harder. If you tell me exactly, or there's some kind of like standard in place that I know exactly what was AI generated and what wasn't, and for each AI generated component, what kind of review went into it before it comes to my desk, now I'm equipped with full transparency to do the best possible review given that context. If I have to make assumptions and guesses, I'm probably going to be wrong about this and not do the best possible job. So if we hide that we use AI, for example, we're actually misleading and making this a lot harder than it needs to be. So that was number 3. Number 4 is to think about delegating tasks to workflows, not just to people. Now, let me explain. It's a mindset shift, right? It's just like I said earlier, but to like rethink how we think about work. This with delegating is the same one. We're used to delegating tasks to individuals. Hey, take this and run with it, for example. By the way, topic of delegation, we did an episode last week on delegating specifically. So if that is a hot topic for you, go check out episode 311. But increasingly, the question isn't just who does this, it's what is the workflow that should get this done and who is responsible for that workflow. Like, how does this, whatever task I have or a request from a senior leader, how does that fit into the different workflows we have and the different tools we use and data we have available? I'm no longer just thinking about a person doing something, but maybe this is a request that we have to plug into one of the workflows so that it's easier to handle requests like this going forward. Maybe a workflow needs to be adjusted. Maybe there is already an existing workflow that I can leverage to get this task done. So don't just think about people, also really think about the different workflows, which then turns into sort of this agentic mindset. Are you looking at the team, and this is probably more so than stage 3, through that lens of having agents do work? And at that stage, you're starting to delegate again, not just to humans, but to agents. So here we're still in stage 2, a bit of an in-between. Let me give you an example. Let's say a client meeting just happened and you need to send some follow-up materials. The old approach would be that you hand it to someone and they put maybe the transcript from the meeting into ChatGPT. That would be stage 1. The new approach is to look at the workflow. Okay, so we're leveraging the transcript, but then we also need to connect to our CRM, which pulls in context from that client, past conversations. It also may use product usage data or engagement data about that client from our data analytics tools. And then it generates a follow-up document that's not just a recap of the meeting, but an enhanced synthesis in a way that includes relevant context the client would care about, and the client knows and is now really happy to see that you're considering that context as well and that it's available to you and considered in that follow-up. Once that's integrated, it goes through a review stage before it goes to the client. Now, that workflow doesn't happen because one person is ambitious and is like, oh my gosh, let me rethink this. We want this stuff to happen because someone, you, thought through the whole process or encouraged the team to think through the whole process and set it up so that we're constantly elevating and augmenting our output. And that's the different kind of leadership or way of delegating than just assigning tasks. So again, the question isn't just who does this, but it's how should this actually work? And then the 5th one is to lead the culture shift on decisions. So AI is going to surface more information faster, right? And with making decisions fast, we gotta make sure that there's clear owners assigned and there's clear processes, and we're not just like jumping the gun just because we can and it's fast. So the question here is, what decisions can happen at the team level? Which decisions can be owned independently? And what needs to be escalated? Also, going back to like, who reviews what? Yeah, who reviews AI generated recommendations before we put this stuff into action? Right? If I ask AI, how should I do this? And AI says, yeah, do option A. Am I just going to do option A, or is there a review process to this? Because when something goes south, I can't just come back and say, well, my justification is because Claude told me. Not going to look very leadership-like, right? That's not a way to think about the decisions. Good leaders, effective leaders, decide about deciding. This is what we cover in our executive presence programs. All the time, you have to really think through how these decisions are made and how your team makes decisions, and especially with AI involved, what gets critically reviewed, who has the institutional context to also sanity check some stuff, where you're like, yeah, that kind of seems off. That's not what seems right, just based on context. And having done this work many, many years, that type of judgment AI doesn't have, and newer people to the organization also don't have. So if you as a leader, you do have that experience, this is where it has to come into play. And these things are not just operational questions, right? They're also cultural ones. If you don't set norms here, the team will likely default to either over-relying on AI output without thinking critically, or they may actually sort of second guess everything and not actually use it. Neither one of them is what we want. We want a team that knows when to trust the output and when to question it, and they know how to make that judgment call. So let me quickly recap those 5. It's run a workflow audit with your team. It is redesign meetings as a system. It's to set those shared standards. Then it's to delegate to workflows, not just to people. And then last but not least, to lead the culture shift and especially consider the decision-making process. Now, here's where I want to land with this episode. The teams that are going to be well positioned in the next couple of years are not the ones that have better access to tools. Everybody has access to very similar tools. The difference is whether someone stepped back and thought about how the work should actually be structured, given what tools are available at any given time. And that is truly a leadership job. It's not the IT's job. It's also not an individual decision that each person makes on their own. You as the manager are the ones who creates the conditions for your team to operate differently. So you run the workflow audit, you set the shared standards, you redesign meeting systems, you think through the workflows, not just the task assignments, and you set the cultural norms around how decisions get made. Now, when I say you do all these things, I don't mean you execute all these things, nor do I mean that you decide on your own, but it's your responsibility to make sure that these things happen. You have to have the conversations, you have to get the team on board. These are going to be kind of KPIs that you have to track. It's not on the IT team, and it's not on the individual. And with that, it's not about keeping up with the technology, which is an important part, but that's not what it's about. It's about you doing the job that reflects the reality your team is actually already operating in. Are they cohesive and aligned and in lockstep, or are they fractured in their approach to AI? So one action for this week, pick one recurring process on your team and ask the team, ideally, if we were to redesign this from scratch today, knowing what tools we have available, what would we do? Would we do it the same way? If not, how would we build it today? That's the starting point. Now, in the show notes, I'm also going to include a link to a framework for running a team workflow audit if you want a starting structure for that 2-hour session with the team. And that's what I've got for you today. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Manager Track podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there.